The bitter wind howled along the dusty street of Bitter Creek, Wyoming, as twilight bled into the unforgiving night. In the heart of this forsaken frontier town, where the echoes of hard travail and quiet sorrow mingled with the creak of wagon wheels, a scene of unspeakable cruelty unfolded beneath a dim, sputtering lantern. A woman, her face streaked with tears and grime, her body trembling from cold and pain, was being beaten mercilessly by a group of ruffianed men. They jeered at her for daring to ask for food, for daring to voice her own needs in a place where the strong rule with brutality. Her pleading cries seemed swallowed by the uncaring desolation of Bitter Creek, as if the very earth were indifferent to her agony. A solitary figure, leaning against the salvo of a faded wooden post, watched with eyes as cold and sorrowful as the winter sky. This was the struggling widower rancher, Jonah McClellan, whose haunted gaze belied a lifetime of loss and regret. His weathered face bore silent traces of grief. Memories of family that once filled his heart with warmth now reduced a ghost drifting over the barren plains. Though he had come to Bitter Creek seeking solace from his own miseries, fate had delivered him to a scene that stirred a forgotten ember deep within his soul. It was the sight of her, bruised and broken by cruelty yet burning with an unyielding spark of defiance, that awakened him. Without a word, Jonah pushed away from the post, his heavy boots stirring up a small cloud of red dust. He moved swiftly yet deliberately, each step measured against the humid night air and the relentless pulse of his conflicted heart. As he approached, his voice, rough with years of sorrow yet suffused with quiet authority, rang out sharply, "That's enough." The men, taken aback by his sudden intervention, paused their brutal mockery. In that brief suspension, the woman's eyes, wide and fearful, sought shelter in his gaze. And then, with one steady motion, Jonah reached out and grasped her trembling hand. "You're safe now," he murmured, his tone both gentle and firm, a promise offered amidst the chaos. The beating ceased as if time itself had slowed to honor his words. The attackers, emboldened by cruelty yet unnerved by the widower's resolve, exchanged uncertain glances before dispersing into the night, leaving behind a scattered trail of insults and bruises. The woman crumpled into a ragged heap on the cold, hard pavement, her sobs soft under the overpowering murmur of the wind. Jonah crouched beside her and carefully cradled her hand, his own callous fingers warm and comforting. "Come with me," he said quietly, beckoning her away from the unsympathetic streets of Bitter Creek. "I have a place, a ranch where mercy still exists." Her eyes lingered on his face, searching for any hint of falsehood, but finding only genuine concern in the depths of his sorrowful blue eyes. Sobbing softly, she managed a nod. Jonah lifted her gently, supporting her with the strength of a man who had known both pain and the quiet courage to rise above it. Outside, the stormy sky wheeled overhead as they made their way through empty alleys and down frostbitten trails. The chill in the air was stark against the warmth of Jonah's embrace, and as they walked, every step seemed to echo the promise of a safer tomorrow. By the time they reached his humble ranch, a solitary homestead tucked away at the edge of an endless Wyoming prairie, the first hints of dawn were stirring on the horizon. The ranch, built of weathered timber and huddled against a vast desolation, radiated a gentle warmth that contrasted sharply with the harsh world beyond. Jonah guided her to a creaking porch where a rugged yet well-loved rocking chair waited. With quiet care, he helped her settle against a pile of thick woolen blankets spread upon the wooden steps. Once inside the modest main room, lit by the soft glow of a single oil lamp and the dying embers in an old hearth, Jonah closed the door firmly behind them, causing it to creak ominously in the silence. The room was sparse, its walls adorned only by faded photographs and a few well-worn mementos of a life once lived. Yet in that quiet space, every detail radiated the possibility of renewal. The scent of cedarwood, mingled with the faint odor of smoke, filled the air as Jonah set about stoking the fire, his actions deliberate and tender, as if each spark might light a path away from the darkness. The woman, whose name Jonah learned was Lydia, shivered and clutched his hand, her eyes reflecting both lingering terror and a dawning hope. I only asked for a meal," she whispered, voice cracking with the weight of her recent torment. "They said I wasn't worth a scrap." Her words, soft as they were laden with heartbreak, rippled through Jonah's core, fueling a determination he had long thought extinguished. He squeezed her hand in return, his own voice a balm against her pain. "You are worth far more than their cruelty. Here you are safe. I promise you that." As the fire's flames danced upon the rough-hewn log, Jonah served Lydia a simple meal of hard bread and warm stew, the aroma mingling with the crisp night air. Outside, the wind's mournful cries seemed to recede, replaced by a tentative hush. Yet even in that semblance of peace, Jonah's eyes betrayed the knowledge that danger still lurked in the shadows, whispers of vengeance and greed that might soon seek to shatter their newfound sanctuary. The quiet murmur of distant hooves and the echo of a hostile laughter in the far corners of Bitter Creek haunted the margins of the night, a constant reminder that even here, safety was a delicate promise. After their meager meal, Jonah moved to fetch fresh blankets from a small chest, draped over them with care, and led Lydia through the modest rooms of his ranch. In each space, light and shadow played upon the worn surfaces, a testament to years of solitude and sorrow gradually yielding to a cure of unexpected kindness. The sense of refuge was palpable, yet was tempered by the unspoken truth that the world outside remained merciless. As they settled into the quiet, a heavy tension coiled in the dark corners of the room. Jonah's weathered gaze fell upon the window, where the first pale streaks of dawn began to split the starry sky. His deepest regrets and the memories of a lost family, once a constant burden, now softened in the luminous glow. He vowed silently that he would not let Lydia suffer alone again, that her gentle spirit would find solace in this battered homestead of hope. Yet, just as the fragile peace began to settle, a sudden, keening sound, a low, accusatory whistle, rose from the prairie beyond the ranch. Jonah stiffened, his grip tightening on Lydia's hand once more, and peered out into the encroaching shadows. In that moment, a solitary figure was seen riding steadily into the distance, a harbinger of conflict, perhaps a pursuer from Bitter Creek, or worse, one of those whose cruelty had beaten her so mercilessly. The sound of driftwood clattering in the wind mingled with that ominous whistle, setting hearts racing with foreboding dread. Lydia's eyes widened in terror as she clutched a worn pendant around her neck, an heirloom that had once been a quiet symbol of lost love, but now felt like a beacon of strength. With a trembling voice, she murmured, "They're coming again." Jonah's face hardened further, determination etched into every line. "Not tonight," he vowed under his breath, his voice quiet but unyielding. "You are safe here, and I will protect you." As the first rays of dawn began to glow timidly against the horizon, a forbidding question lingered in the charged silence. Would this safe haven withstand the relentless cruelty of the world, or would the darkness of revenge and greed shatter what hope had begun to blossom here? As Jonah and Lydia clinged to a fragile promise of safety beneath the breaking dawn, the distant echo of a whistle and the sight of a solitary rider on the horizon foreshadow the coming storm, leaving their uncertain future suspended on a knife's edge. A solitary whistle pierced the early dawn, its mournful note echoing across the frostbitten plains and seeping into the quiet of Jonah McClellan's isolated ranch. The sound, sharp against the cold air, froze Jonah and Lydia in a suspended moment of dread. Through the thin veil of dim pre-dawn light streaming through the cabin's cracked window, the silhouette of a lone rider lingered, a dark figure that vanished into swirling dust before Jonah could discern his face. The haunting sound of that whistle, still echoing the distance, set their nerves on edge as they realized the threat from Lydia's past had not been vanquished. Inside the modest main room, the glow of a low-burning lantern flickered over rough-hewn wooden beams and threadbare blankets. The scent of damp earth and lingering cedar smoke mingled with an uneasy chill that crept beneath their skin. Jonah, his grief and determination etched into every furrowed line of his face, gently held Lydia's trembling hand. Her pale eyes, still glistening with unshed tears, clutched a small, tarnished pendant, a relic of lost love and the only keepsake from a life filled with cruelty. Though the pendant's once bright shine had faded over years of neglect, Tonight it seemed to pulse with a newfound promise, a quiet call to hope amid despair. "Don't worry," Jonah murmured softly, his deep voice a soothing cadence amidst the swirling uncertainty. "You're safe here, Lydia. I swear by the memories I've kept. No harm will befall you while you're under my roof." His words, though spoken with sparse conviction, cut through the heavy silence of the room like a bomb. Lydia, still reeling from the brutal beating she endured on Bitter Creek's harsh streets, beaten simply for asking for food, nodded ever so slightly. Her voice, fragile and wavering, finally broke the silence. I thought I lost everything that day, but somehow you saved me." Her admission was laced with both sorrow and a tentative hope, as if acknowledging that despite all her scars, she might yet learn to trust again. The two sat in silence a few moments longer as the first hints of dawn began to lighten the edges of the horizon. Outside, the remnants of the rider's presence. Faint hoofprints in the soft, dew-laden ground and a whisper of discarded scrap of cloth served as a grim reminder that Lydia's past was not easily forgotten. Jonah rose, resolving to secure his newfound sanctuary. Slowly, he walked to the front door and peered into the awakening wilderness. The chill in the air was palpable, and the quiet murmur of the wind through the nearby cottonwoods seemed almost a warning of lingering dangers. Returning to the cabin, Jonah gathered flints and dry wood from a cluttered shelf beside the old hearth. He set about stoking the fire, coaxing bright embers to life, their lively dance casting elongated, quivering shadows upon the rustic walls. As the flames roared softly, bathing the room in a warm yet gentle glow, he settled back beside Lydia. "I'll keep watch," he promised, his voice resolute, "until we're certain that no one unwanted lingers near." His eyes, dark and pained with memories of a haunted past, of family loss and vows unfulfilled, reflected the steady flame that now burned behind them. In the quiet moments that followed, Lydia reached into the small, rough pocket of her tattered shawl and withdrew the pendant, holding it in both hands. She seemed to examine it anew. The cool metal, etched with delicate filigree, whispered secrets of an era when love had been gentle and trust had been a promise made in sunshine rather than blood. "This belonged to him," she said softly, referring to the man she once loved, the man whose memory now mingled with torment. "It's all I have left is memory, and perhaps the key to something more, something that they want to control." Her words, sparse and trembling, carried the weight of decades of abuse, of a life forced to endure cruelty in exchange for survival. Jonah listened intently, his heart aching with the realization that Lydia's pain was intertwined with his own. "Perhaps it is not a key to treasure, but to your freedom," he offered gently. "Let it remind you that what you endure does not define you. Here, you are reborn, not as a victim, but as someone strong enough to reclaim her own life." His voice, though low, resounded with calm authority that tempered the raw edges of her sorrow. As dawn crept higher, the chill of the night began to give way to a reluctant warmth. Jonah and Lydia rose to tend to the humble chores of the ranch. Together they repaired a sagging fence along the back of the cabin, their joint labor a quiet metaphor for the rebuilding of trust and the mending of broken hearts. The crisp morning air carried scents of wet sagebrush and wildflowers, and even the creek of old would seem to promise resilience in the face of the harsh frontier. In rare, tender moments amid their work, Jonah recounted memories of his lost family, a time when laughter and light once filled his days, while Lydia shared bittersweet recollections of a gentler past now obscured by cruelty. Yet, as the day unfolded with its bittersweet blend of care and cautious optimism, the lingering threat from beyond the ranch walls cast a persistent shadow. At one point, while fixing a loose board along the porch, Jonah discovered a crude marking carved into the weathered wood, a symbol he recognized from the scars of Bitter Creek. It was a mark no stranger could create, but rather the twisted insignia of those who once tormented Lydia. His heart sank as he realized the rider in the distance might not have been a random wanderer after all, but a deliberate emissary of her past anguish. Later that morning, as a low mist began to blur the edges of the Wyoming prairie, Jonah found a small, folded note tucked beneath the door. Its paper was rough and damp, with hurried, jagged handwriting that seethed with malice. Your haven is not free from our reach. The note, a silent threat from the abuser who had once beaten Lydia for her plea for food, confirmed that her haunted past was determined to intrude upon their newfound sanctuary. Lydia, upon seeing the note, trembled visibly. For a long moment, neither spoke. The weight of that message, coupled with the promise of revisited horrors, hung heavy in the stillness. Jonah's protective instincts flared with renewed intensity. We must be vigilant, he declared, his voice an iron promise. They seek to drag you back into the darkness, but here you will be shielded by our strength. He placed a steady, comforting hand on her shoulder, his gaze meeting hers with an unspoken covenant. In that moment, the pendant she held so dear, once a symbol of past loss, began to transform anew, a beacon of resilience in the face of unfolding threats. As the sun climbed higher, painting the snow-dusted trails and the rustic timbers of the ranch in tender hues of gold and amber, Jonah and Lydia resumed their tasks with determined urgency. The remnants of the cold night mingled with the promise of a new day. Yet the note's cruel words and the earlier whistle of the elusive rider haunted every shadow, every creak of the rickety barn, every whisper of the wind against the cabin's worn walls seemed to murmur a warning. In a quiet moment, while preparing a modest meal, Lydia's fingers grazed the surface of the pendant, tracing its delicate etchings. This belonged to him, she repeated softly, as if to reaffirm the memory of the man who once loved her. But now, amid the looming threat and Jonah's steady assurance, the pendant was more than a relic. It was a symbol of reclaiming her dignity, of the promise that no cruelty could shatter the spirit within her. As the day wore on, signs of the rider's presence persisted. A faint hoofprint near the rear steps, a breeze that carried an unmistakable scent of tobacco and bitter regret. Each clue compounded the tension, nudging Jonah and Lydia closer to a precipice of dread they could not ignore. With a firm resolve born of shared suffering, Jonah resolved to stake their claim against the encroaching darkness. We will not be driven back, he vowed softly, gazing out over the vast, frost-spangled prairie. Here, in this wilderness, we forge our own destiny. Yet even as his words filled the quiet expanses of the ranch, an unmistakable chill settled where hope had taken root. A slow, deliberate knock at the side door, a sound that had not been heard since the previous night's terror, sent a ripple of fear through their hearts. Lydia's eyes widened, and Jonah's hand tightened on the note he had found. In that moment, as the morning light wavered over the horizon, the new day promised not only recovery, but also an inevitable reckoning with the ghosts of Lydia's past. As the mysterious knock reverberates once more through the cabin and the engraved pendant whispers secrets of forgotten love and cruelty, Jonah and Lydia brace themselves. Will the threat be further revealed, or will the fragile sanctuary they built finally be torn asunder by the legacy of torment? The persistent knock on the cabin door still echoed in the cold, thin air as Jonah McClellan steadied his shaking hand around his rifle. Outside, the faint sound of footsteps and the soft, measured whisper of voice had merged with the twilight, a reminder that the threat had not yet passed. Inside, Lydia's eyes were fixed on the door, her trembling fingers clutching the tarnished pendant that served as her only memory of a lost past. The firelight danced on the rough-hewn walls, flickering shadows across a room heavy with both lingering fear and fragile hope. Every creak of the cabin and every gust of the damp, Wyoming wind amplified the sense of imminent danger. For a long, breathless moment, Jonah and Lydia remained frozen, the silence between them punctuated only by the slow, relentless cadence of the wind rustling to the cottonwoods outside. Then, with cautious resolve, Jonah rose to answer the door. He pushed it open a crack, just enough to peer into the gathering gloom. There, silhouetted against the cold pre-dawn mist, stood a lone man, his features obscured by the broom. The stranger's that was pulled low over his eyes, and his presence radiated an aura of urgency and foreboding that sent a chill down Jonah's spine. "Who's there?" Jonah called, his voice steady despite the storm of apprehension raging within him. The stranger did not answer immediately. Instead, he motioned with a severed hand before stepping back. In the distance, a single boot print in the soft, wet earth bore an unmistakable insignia, a crude carving that Jonah recognized from Bitter Creek's notorious records. His pulse quickened as he recalled the tales of men who had tormented Lydia, men whose cruelty was masked by greed and a lust for power. The insignia confirmed his worst fears. Her abuser, the very man who had once beaten her for daring to ask for food, was closing in. Jonah quickly shut the door and locked it, the sound of the bolt echoing in the small room like the tolling of a death knell. He exchanged a troubled glance with Lydia, whose eyes darted around in terror, yet burned with glimmer of fierce resilience. "They're near," she whispered, voice raw with fear and determination. "I can still hear their boots and their curses." Her words were almost lost beneath the murmur of rain against the tin roof, but they landed heavy and true in Jonah's heart. Determined to act, Jonah knelt beside Lydia and took her hand, gently squeezing it as if to transfer his resolve into her trembling grasp. "I promise you're safe now," he murmured, his tone a mixture of steely assurance and unspoken sorrow from losses too deep to name. He rose and walked to the small window, where the fog had begun to recede ever so slightly with the approach of dawn. Outside, among the dew-laden trails and frost-tipped sagebrush, he could see more clearly the evidence of the pursuer. The boot print, fresh and distinct, now accompanied by a scrap of worn cloth bearing a cryptic mark. This was no random wanderer. It was a calculated sign of returning cruelty. Inside, as Jonah returned to Lydia, he noticed her eyes drifting to the pendant at her neck. The tarnished metal, once simply a relic of lost love, now seemed inscribed with secrets. "This pendant, it bears a mark," she said softly, almost to herself, running her fingers reverently along an engraving that she had long ignored. "I recall that my late husband once promised it would reveal the truth if I ever dared to reclaim my life." Her voice wavered between melancholy and defiance, revealing that the pendant was intertwined with dark memories of abuse and betrayal. Jonah's protective gaze softened at her delicate confession. "Perhaps it is not merely a relic of pain, but a key to your freedom," he offered quietly. His words, filled with a hopeful undercurrent, sought to transform the pendant from an emblem of past suffering into one of revolution and rebirth. The idea seeped into the small cabin like a gentle salve, momentarily dispelling the sting of fear that the knock had brought. But as the first pale beams of dawn crept over the horizon, a low, urgent whistle cut through the air from outside once more, the sound of too many men marching in unison toward the ranch. Jonah's grip on his rifle tightened as the wind shifted, carrying with it the distant, discordant echoes of trampling warriors and harsh laughter. The atmosphere, already thick with tension, became a crucible of impending violence. Before Jonah or Lydia could speak, a sharp rap at the door rattled the already trembling wood. This time, however, the sound was not accompanied by the fleeting shadow of a solitary man. Instead, it heralded the arrival of a group. Jonah's heart pounded as he exchanged one last look with Lydia, a look that spoke a shared dread and unyielding courage. "We have little choice but to confront this head-on," he said in a low, resolute tone. "You must trust that I will not let them harm you, Lydia. Your past holds secrets, yes, but I promise that from this moment, you are more than your suffering." At that moment, a harsh voice outside shouted, "Hand over the pendant, or we'll come in by force." The threat, echoing to the cold morning air, struck Lydia like a blow. Tears welled in her eyes, but her gaze did not waver. She raised the pendant as if to shield it and her very soul. Jonah's jaw clenched. The cruelty in that shout was all too familiar, a grating reminder of every time she had been denied dignity. In a heartbeat, Jonah made a decision. "If they must have it, let them earn it," he declared, his voice steady with grim determination. He signaled for Lydia to hide the pendant in a small crevice behind a dusty stack of old crates near the door. "We will use your treasure against them," he whispered urgently. "Let it be the bait that exposes their greed." Lydia's wide eyes, shimmering with both hope and fear, met his, and in that moment, their fates intertwined ever more tightly. Steeling himself, Jonah opened the door crack and peered out. The early light revealed a group of rugged silhouettes. More than a single pursuer now. A small band of men, their eyes glinting with malice and hunger for domination. Among them, a familiar figure emerged from the gloom. A man whose expression carried the unmistakable arrogance of one who had once taken advantage of the weak. The sight stole Jonah's breath. His mind warped with bitter recognition. That cannot be, he murmured, voice low and pained, as the figure's gaze met his for an agonizing second. Inside the cabin, Lydia listened to Jonah's hushed exclamation, her heart contracting with worry. The pendant clutched in its hidden place seemed to pulse, as if preparing to reveal long-buried secrets. The assembled threat outside promised not only the return of Lydia's abuser, a man whose cruelty had scarred her soul, but perhaps a remnant of Jonah's own past mistakes. As a group of men edged closer, the whistling wind and the low murmur of voices created a dissonant symphony that foretold a confrontation that would reshape their lives forever. Jonah stepped back inside and slammed the door shut, his own resolve hardening like the frost over Bitter Creek. "They're here," he announced in a voice that trembled with both anger and sorrow. "I see him, and he is not alone." His eyes, dark with unspoken pain, locked with Lydia's, conveying a promise as frail as it was fierce. "We will face them, and together we will take back our future." Lydia's breath caught in her throat as she felt another contraction surge through her body, sharp and unyielding. The room's firelight danced over her features and the hidden pendant, and she clenched her eyes shut against the terror and resolve that waged war within her. The air grew heavy with anticipation, the silence between heartbeats stretching into an eternity as the sounds of the approaching band, a wave of dark intent, echoed ever nearer. As Jonah's declaration fills the cabin and Lydia braces against the pain of impending birth, the silhouettes of her abusers materialize at the threshold, ushering in a conflict that threatens to unravel the fragile sanctuary they've built. Will their newfound strength and the secret of the pendant be enough to defy the encroaching darkness? Rain's remnants clung to the ragged shingles as the first rays of a reluctant dawn crept over the Wyoming horizon. The echo of hostile hooves still trembled in the cold air outside Jonah McClellan's cabin. While inside, the atmosphere was charged with a dread that mingled with the flickering firelight. Jonah stood at the threshold, rifle in hand, eyes narrowed as he surveyed the dark silhouettes cast against the snow-dusted prairie. Lydia, her breath ragged with labor pains, clung to the side of an old wooden table. Her tarnished pendant, half hidden beneath her threadbare shawl, gleamed ominously in the wavering light. Every creak of the cabin's timbers and every gust of wind to the loose, rattling shutters deepened the sense of imminent peril. The threatening note from last night still burned in Jonah's mind, its jagged command echoing, "Your haven is not free from our reach." And now the figures outside, a small band of men bearing the cruel insignia of Bitter Creek's most feared abuser, had returned. Among them, a hardened face emerged, a man Jonah recognized with a gut-wrenching clarity. Marcus Doyle, the man responsible for Lydia's earlier torture, and once conspirator in the betrayal that tore his own family apart, now led the charge. His eyes, cold and gleaming with malice, locked with Jonah's as if daring to defy a fate long sealed by cruelty and greed. "Hand over the pendant." Marcus bellowed through the wavering door, his voice echoing across the frozen land. His demand reverberated with the weight of old sins and unpunished crimes. Lydia's eyes widened, and she winced as another contraction seized her. "They want it. They always want it," she whispered, voice trembling yet laced with defiant sorrow. The pendant, a relic of a lost love and a symbol of suffering, had become the linchpin in a cruel puzzle, a proof of her past that her tormentors believed possessed a secret to a hidden treasure her abusive kin coveted. Jonah's jaw clenched as he stepped back into the dim interior. Every double take of his mind recalled the painful memory of a promise broken long ago, a failure that cost him dearly. His heart, scarred and haunted by the loss of his own family, now beat for Lydia, for this fragile hope. Placing himself between the door and the trembling figure of Lydia, he spoke in a low, resolute tone, Not while I draw breath. His voice, though quiet, carried the weight of redemption that he so desperately sought. Outside, the harsh winter wind whistled a mournful dirge, and the figures of Marcus Doyle's men gathered closer, their boots crunching over frost and the remnants of last night's storm. Jonah slowly stepped to a battered side table and retrieved a set of crude poles and a length of rough rope. "Lydia," he whispered, "we must set a trap. That pendant of yours. Let's use it to mislead them, to show them we are not as helpless as they presume." Her eyes, glistening with tears that mirror both pain and newfound determination, met his. I cannot let them have it," she managed softly, clutching the pendant as if it were her last vestige of identity. "It is all I have left of him, of who I was." Jonah gently reached for her hand, his touch both tender and urgent. "Then let it be a symbol that we choose our own worth," he said, his voice wavering with a mix of remorse and fierce promise. "Tonight we fight not for treasure, but for your freedom and for every soul they've tried to break." His words, though few, rang with a sincerity that seemed to sew together the torn fabric of their fragile sanctuary. It took only moments for a tense standoff to develop as Marcus Doyle's men began to edge along the door, their silhouettes shifting like grim phantoms in the cold light of dawn. A heavy silence enveloped the cabin as Jonah stepped forward once more, his eyes never leaving the threshold. "I have no quarrel with you," he called out, voice steady yet laced with challenge. "But harm her, and you will answer to me." The words echoed, mingling with the distant murmur of coyote howls and the rustling of the sagging cottonwoods beyond the property. For a heartbeat, time seemed suspended. Then, with a sudden measured ferocity, one of Marcus Doyle's men lunged at the half-open door. Jonah's revolver roared in response, the report punctuating the silence as the attacker staggered back with a cry of pain. In that fleeting moment, the attackers hesitated, as if the resolute defiance in Jonah's eyes had shaken their resolve. Yet Marcus himself remained standing outside, his gaze fixed, unyielding and vengeful. As the conflict swirled in a tight circle around the door, Lydia's labor reached a fevered pitch. Her cries, a raw mix of agony and triumph, resonated with the pulse of the earth beneath the frost. Jonah's heart tightened at the sound, and in his left hand he grasped Lydia's while his right remained near the revolver. "Hold on, Lydia," he murmured, voice soft yet imbued with unyielding determination. "Your strength will see you through this. We will not let them steal your future." The room around them swayed with the intensity of the moment. The flicker of the oil lamp, the creak of ancient beams, and the relentless drumming of rain outside all played a part in the symphony of their defiance. In the midst of the turmoil, a sudden shift in the air brought a subtle clue. A scrap of paper, half wet, fluttered against the doorframe. Jonah snatched it up and unfolded it to reveal a hastily scrawled message. "Your secret binds you to us. Turn back or suffer." The note, soaked with malice and desperation, confirmed that Marcus Doyle's pursuit was not solely about the pendant's hidden promise, but also about an even darker secret long buried. A secret that intertwined Lydia's past with the abuser's insatiable greed. Lydia's eyes widened as she read over his shoulder, the age of betrayal and pain flickering briefly across her face. It speaks of a feud," she whispered, voice quivering with barely suppressed fury. "A crime committed long ago where I was meant to pay the price." When she spoke, it was as if the pendant pulsed with a hidden energy, an imprint of memory that had been carefully locked away. Jonah's gaze hardened as he absorbed the implication. Here lay a link between her suffering and the long shadow of Bitter Creek, a legacy that not only brought their tormentor here, but might also hold clues to the injustice that had defined her life. Determined not to let fear overtake him, Jonah turned his attention again to the mounting threat outside. With cautious steps, he motioned for Lydia to remain silent and quickly knelt by the door. "We have but one chance," he whispered fiercely. "We must use that pendant as our bait. Hide it well, and when they come for it, we will let them see only what they expect, a token of your past. Then we strike." His plan, born of a desperate need to protect her, was daring, but it was perhaps the only way to mislead Marcus and his men, to expose their greed and cruelty for what it truly was. The moments that followed stretched interminably as Jonah moved to set a crude trap just beyond the door. He tied a length of rope to a heavy beam and fashioned a noose, hoping to catch one of the advancing attackers if they dared breach the threshold. Over his shoulder, he cast a final protective glance at Lydia, whose eyes shimmered with quiet courage amid the pain. "Trust me," he urged softly. "We will endure this night. You are stronger than the world that has tried to break you." Just as Jonah secured his makeshift trap, a new sound erupted, a low, guttural growl carried by the chill wind, echoing the fury of a beast awakened by injustice. They both froze, every nerve alight in the oppressive silence. The door shuddered as if under the weight of an approaching force. Jonah's heart pounded in his ears as he clenched his jaw. Outside, he could just make out the outline of more figures, their movements deliberate and menacing, merging with the swirling mist of dawn. Then, in a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, the barrel of a rifle flashed briefly in the newborn light, a promise of violence yet to unfurl. With a final, resolute glare toward the encroaching darkness, Jonah took a steadying breath and whispered, "This is not the end, but the beginning of our stand." As the men pressed closer and the tension in the cabin became almost tangible, every flickering shadow on the creaking floorboards bore witness to their determination. As Jonah steadies himself and Lydia braces against the mounting pain of impending childbirth, a new, threatening silhouette appears at the window, a final adversary whose motives seem inexplicably tied to both Lydia's past and Jonah's long-ago regrets. Will their cunning and resilience be enough to defy this relentless storm of cruelty, or will their fragile sanctuary crumble beneath the weight of betrayal and bloodshed? Under a bruised dawn that shattered the long, dark night, the shattered window framed a tableau of raw defiance. Outside, the figures of Marcus Doyle's men pressed relentlessly against the cabin's door, their cursed echoes merging with the haggard cry of a woman in agony. Inside, Jonah McClellan stood resolute, his eyes fierce and sorrowful in equal measure. Lydia, her body racked with labor pains, clutched the tarnished pendant to her chest as if it were a lifeline. The pendant, its delicate filigree now gleaming with unshed tears and secret resolve, had been both a symbol of Lydia's tormented past and a hidden key to a legacy of injustice. Tonight, it would reveal truths long buried. The air in the cabin was thick with the ghostly scent of cedar smoke and wet sagebrush, blended with the faint fragrance of blood and hope. Every creaking beam and trembling shutter bore witness to the constant drum of a frontier's grief. Jonah stepped forward, his revolver resting against his calloused palm, yet his voice resonated with an unyielding promise. "Lydia," he murmured, his tone both gentle and determined, "we have come too far to let these monsters steal our future. Tonight we stand for our lives and our truth." At that moment, the door burst inward with violent shudder as Marcus Doyle himself stepped through, flanked by a scattering of embittered men. His face, taut with malice and masked memories, burned with the arrogance of one who believed he owned the darkness. "Give me the pendant," Marcus snarled, his voice a rasping dirge that stirred old wounds. "Or suffer for your insolence." His eyes searched Lydia's tear-stained face, as if hoping to reclaim the woman she once was. In that charged instant, Jonah's heart pounded, the ghosts of his lost family and past betrayals colliding in a maelstrom of fury and regret. Before Marcus could advance further, Jonah lifted his chin and narrowed his gaze. "I will not yield what is mine," he declared, voice echoing like a solemn vow in the near-dawn quiet. With a swift, deliberate movement, he stepped between Marcus and Lydia, his eyes locking onto the abusers with the intensity of a man on the brink of redemption. "You have haunted Bitter Creek long enough," Jonah said, each word heavy with decades of sorrow. "Your cruelty ends here." A tense silence fell as the two men stared each other down, their conflict a collision of past betrayals and present defiance. The firelight danced wildly over their hardened features, casting long, desperate shadows that swayed like the bending willow. Outside, The wind cut through the chill air as if lamenting the necessity of violence on such a pain day. In that moment, all eyes turned to the pendant that rested on Lydia's chest. With trembling hands, she raised it slightly, revealing an intricate engraving, one that depicted an archaic symbol, a mark that spoke of forbidden pact and a crime committed long ago. The engraving, when read in the flickering light, confirmed what Jonah had long suspected. Marcus's insatiable greed was fueled not only by a lust for power, but by a secret betrayal that had once cost Jonah dearly. The revelation struck like a thunderbolt. Jonah's eyes glistened with unshed tears as he recalled the fateful night when his own family had been lost in a web of bribery and broken promises. A night when someone close had turned their back in greed. "Marcus," he spat, voice low and trembling with barely contained rage, "you share my past betrayal. You are not just my enemy, but a traitor to your own blood." Marcus's sneer faltered for a moment, the flicker of uncertainty betraying him. As the standoff grew ever more precarious, Lydia's pain intensified. Her cries, intermingled with both agony and fierce defiance, rose and fell like the tides. Jonah, torn between the necessity of combat and the desperate need to protect the life she was about to bring forth, lowered his revolver momentarily. Gently, he reached toward her, his hand warm and steady against her clammy skin. "Hold on, Lydia," he whispered, his voice soft as a prayer amid the clash of wills. "Your strength is greater than any cruelty. Our future depends on you." With a determined nod, Lydia inhaled shakily. "I will not be broken," she choked out, her eyes flashing a brave, sorrowful light. In that moment, a plan took root in Jonah's mind. He slowly stepped back and, with careful precision, motioned to one of his loyal ranch hands, a quiet, stern man named Caleb, who had long been an ally in the silent wars of Bitter Creek. "Caleb," Jonah commanded in a low rumble, "now is the time to set our trap. Use the fire's glow and the pendant's light to lure them off balance." Caleb nodded gravely and darted to a corner of the cabin where old ropes, wooden poles, and salvage materials lay scattered, a crude arsenal for the desperate hour. Jonah continued, "We will hide the pendant from their view, then let it fall where it may guide them into our snare." With that, he and Caleb worked swiftly but deliberately, their movements synchronized by the urgency of survival and for a future worth claiming. Outside the cabin, the tension thickened. Marcus's men, undeterred by the brief setback, continued their advance, their dark silhouettes moving as a single, relentless force across the snowy plains. The wind howled, carrying with it a chorus of distant coyote calls and the soft lament of a land steeped in sorrow and remembrance. In the chaos outside, one of the enemy's shouts broke through. "He will not hide forever! Bring forth the pendant!" Jonah's grip on his revolver tightened as he peered out the window. Moments later, the door burst open once more, and in staggered to the threshold came a courier, mud-splattered and fearful-eyed, clutching another note that had been delivered with ruthless precision. Jonah snatched the note, unfolding it quickly. This new message, scrawled in angry, jagged letters, declared, "The secret of your past is our future. Surrender now, or all shall be lost." The message, wrapped in bitterness and foreboding, resonated deeply with the revelations in the pendant's engraving. Lydia's eyes grew wide as she recognized echoes of the very betrayal that had haunted her for years. It confirms it," she murmured. "The pendant bears a mark of my former love. No, my abuser, who wronged us both." Her trembling voice was a mix of anguish and defiant resolve. Jonah stepped over to her, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "We will not yield to these shadows of the past," he declared, his tone both firm and compassionate. "Our sanctuary and our very souls belong to us alone." At that moment, the distant sound of accelerated hooves grew louder, and the faces of Marcus's men gathered like vultures at the window. Jonah's eyes met Caleb's in silent understanding. They had to act before the approaching threat could overwhelm them. With a final, resolute glance at the pendant, now hidden carefully beneath a loose floorboard as planned, Jonah whispered, "This is our moment. We stand united or we fall divided. The cabin shuddered with the impending violence as the door trembled under the pressure of heavy boots. The air was heavy with the scent of sweat, fear, and the coppery tang of spilled blood. In a burst of defiant hope, the first of Marcus's men lunged through the doorway. A cacophony of shouts and the sharp report of gunfire erupted, punctuating the quiet dawn with chaos. Jonah and Caleb met the assault with fierce determination, while Lydia clutched her side as another contraction seized her. Amid the furious struggle, the outlines of the enemy blurred into a hazy dance of betrayal and greed, their presence a dark tide that threatened to drown their fragile sanctuary. In the tumult, Jonah locked eyes with Marcus himself, a man whose greed and cruelty were now laid bare. Their gaze met with the weight of shared transgressions and bitter memories, as if the sins of the past had summoned them to this final reckoning. "Your reign of terror ends here," Jonah growled, his voice carrying both personal vengeance and the hope of redemption. The confrontation crackled like a live wire, each heartbeat a drum of impending justice. As the battle reached its fevered peak, the storm outside began to relent, giving way to a somber clarity in the rising light. The skirmish slowed, and the silhouettes of Marcus's men began a hasty retreat, leaving behind their wounded pride and the bitter promise of future attack. In the stillness that followed, Lydia's anguished cries softened and then, miraculously, faded into a delicate new sound, the first cry of life. Amid the lingering echoes of violence and sorrow, a newborn's fragile wail pierced the air, a sound that resonated with both devastation and hope. Lydia, her face wet with a mingling of anguish and exultation, smiled weakly at Jonah. I am not alone," she whispered, her voice trembling with newfound strength. Jonah gently lifted her, supporting her weary frame as he cradled her hand. "No, you are safe," he replied softly, his eyes glistening with tears of relief and redemption. The pendant, now revealed to be not a key to treasure but a testament to survival and the inescapable truth of their shared past, lay hidden, a silent promise of resilience. In the aftermath of the fray, as Marcus disappeared into the fading gloom with his tainted ambition, Jonah and Lydia stood together by the open door, watching the retreating figures merge with the somber hues of dawn. The cold air, no longer laced with the acrid sting of hostility, now carried a quiet song of renewal. Outside the cabin, the Wyoming wilderness stretched vast and unyielding, a canvas upon which they would now dare to paint a future of hope. Inside, the dying embers of the fire gently illuminated the tender scene. Jonah's protective gaze, Lydia's weary smile, and the tiny, unsteady breath of the newborn echoing the promise of life's persistence. With a heavy yet hopeful heart, Jonah softly declared, "Today, we have reclaimed our dignity in the face of cruelty. Our past does not define us." Lydia's eyes shone as she nodded, her hand gently caressing the hidden pendant. "I will carry this as a symbol of our survival, a reminder that we were once broken, yet we have come together to forge a new destiny." As the light of day fully embraced the ranch, Jonah and Lydia, bound by shared pain and fierce hope, began to clear away the remnants of the night's horrors. Together, they mended not only the physical bruises upon the land, but also the intangible fractures in their hearts. Amid whispered promises, quiet laughter, and the soft cooing of new life, they resolved to build a future defined by resilience, redemption, and the enduring strength of found family. In that final radiant moment before the world around them stirred to life, a moment when every breath and every heartbeat was imbued with the promise of renewal, Jonah and Lydia stood united. They had survived the onslaught of cruelty, and though the scars of betrayal lingered, the tender light of a new beginning shone bright. The ranch, a silent witness to their journey, now opened its gates to a future where hope triumphed over darkness, and the legacy of their suffering transformed into a beacon for tomorrow.